Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm here to resurrect a tag that I hadn't seen certainly since my time beginning to watch BookTube, but that has been around for ages and it's certainly one that I have never done before. But Lauren of Lauren and the Books resurrected it recently, so I thought I would as well. And that is the Time and Place book tag. This was originally created by Jen Campbell, so I will leave her channel down below. Essentially, the idea is that you pick 10 books that have stuck with you so vividly that you remember exactly where you were when you first read them. Now, when I started going through my shelves, I realized that I remembered exactly where I was when I read almost all of them. So this was very difficult, but I did find 10 that I found had particularly good stories attached to the memories. So we are going to go all the way back to the summer of 2005, which was when I first read Pride and Prejudice. I was 13. I had just finished 8th grade. I was starting high school the next year, and my parents and I had gone on vacation through Bavaria and Austria. So we had made it to the hotel in Vienna, and I was about halfway through. I just made it up to the point where Lydia elopes, and I remember lying on the bed in the hotel room in Vienna with the book suspended over my head. And it was not this lovely edition that I have now. It was a very cheap and very old plain blue hardcover. And as I lay there with the book suspended over my face, the first 45 pages fell out as a chunk and fell on my face. And I was horrified. I didn't realize that books could do that. I had never seen one fall apart before. So that was a bit of a terrifying moment. But I actually kept that edition for another year or two afterwards, just with a removable section. But now I have 3 fantastic editions that are complete and not falling apart in the least, and I am very, very grateful. Next, we are going to go to later on that same year, so late 2005, possibly early 2006, when I had also started the Bloody Jack series by L.A. Meyer. And I specifically remember this one. This is book 3 in the series, Under the Jolly Roger. This series is the story of Mary Jackie Faber, who has many maritime adventures in the early 19th century, and she travels the world being a sailor, a pirate, just a general rebel, but utterly lovable. And I remember distinctly sitting and reading this book in Mrs. Pardalis's world history class, and reading this book as I always did, because I usually finished my work rather early, so I would just read until everyone else had finished as well and we could all move on. Jackie also loves to entertain. She always manages to find herself in some sort of tavern or a pub and ends up singing and dancing and entertaining everyone else. And I remember being utterly fascinated and feeling this wonderful kinship because she was singing songs that I knew, that I had grown up with. I grew up on traditional Celtic music and folk songs, and I just felt utterly seen because I knew no one else around me in that class would have recognized those songs. But I knew what Jackie was singing about, and I could hear exactly what she would have been singing, and I could therefore imagine how she might have acted them out, how she might have slowed down a particular verse for some dramatic effect, and it made it that much more compelling for me. 2 years later, I distinctly remember reading The Bolin Inheritance by Philippa Gregory. This one has slightly less pleasant memories of where I was at the time. It would have been March of 2008. And I was sitting in the Science Horizons competition, which was a science fair, basically, for middle schoolers, high schoolers. Now, I do not particularly like science, and this was not something I ever would have voluntarily participated in. But my entire chemistry class had to participate in Science Horizons, and our projects were graded in school, in addition to actually competing in Science Horizons, which was torturous. It took the entire morning because there were so many students. It took that long for the judges to get around to everyone. Plus, I was not feeling well. It turns out I had had an allergic reaction to shellfish the night before, and after Science Horizons, my parents and I figured out that that was probably what was making me sick. But we hadn't realized it yet, so I had been feeling horrible the night before. I still didn't feel well that morning, but I had to sit there all morning by my project and wait to be asked questions about it. And all of my friends were getting sick as well. There was some sort of horrible cold going around. And I remember everyone just crawling under the tables to take a nap in between interview rounds. And we were just miserable. But I remember having this to read, which made it a little bit more bearable. This is sort of a sequel to the other Bolin Girl. This book follows the last certainly two of the penultimate wives of Henry VIII. We see from Anne of Cleves' perspective, who is my personal favorite wife, Catherine Howard's perspective, and from Jane Boleyn, who was George Boleyn's wife, George Boleyn being the brother of Anne Boleyn. And I found it particularly fascinating, so diving into one of my favorite time periods made that whole terrible experience that little bit better. The next book that I distinctly remember where I was when I read it is Charles Dickens' In Love by Robert Garnett. And I was in college, I was in my senior year of college, so this would have been January of 2013. And I read it because I took a class with Robert Garnett my freshman year. He was one of our professors in the English department. So I was really eager to hear what he had to say about Dickens. And this book in particular looks at Dickens' women, both the women in his life, and thus how those relationships may or may not have informed the way he wrote about women in his novels. And it was really fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. But I remember being on a phone interview for grad school. I had interviewed with the school secretary, but the interviews for grad school were when I was already back in Pennsylvania, and there was no way to make it back to Connecticut in time. So I had a phone call with the interview staff, and I soon later learned that one of Dr. Billings' tactics was to ask all potential applicants what they had been reading recently, so that she knew that we were reading something, particularly if we were going to be English teachers. But she asked everyone this just because. And I remember having to tell her that the last two books that I read were Anna Karenina and this book. And then I remember hanging up after that interview and thinking, dear God, that combination makes me sound so pretentious. I really hope that that didn't work against me. It clearly didn't, because I got into the program and all was well. But that has therefore branded a very distinct memory about this book on my own memory. Next, we go to July of 2015, when I read The Bishop's Wife by Mettie Ivy Harrison, which is a book very few people have heard of. I had heard about it on an NPR interview as I was running errands on a Saturday morning, and so I managed to track down a copy just as I was flying out to Utah to visit my dear friend Amanda. And I remember sitting on the airport floor, waiting for my plane home, and reading this book. And this book is about a mystery that takes place within a Utah predominantly Mormon community from the perspective of the local bishop's wife. And she is the one who sets about trying to solve what has happened to this missing child. It's a great mystery. It turns out it's a series, which I never realized, so I'm going to have to track down the rest of the books now. But what made it extra special was sitting there and realizing, oh my gosh, we drove through Draper as we were traveling around. I've been to Levi, I've been to all of the places that it mentions, and it just made the reading experience that much more vivid and that much more special. Then we move to April of 2016 when I read Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This is one of my favorite Sarah Waters books. It's one of her Victorian books, and it is absolutely thrilling. I don't want to tell you too much of the plot because what makes it so wonderful is all of the twists and turns that the plot takes that you do not see coming. So I don't dare even begin to describe it to you because I can't take it as far as I want to in order to hook you in. What I specifically remember about this book is that my family and I had driven down to Florida to visit my grandfather. And so we had a few days on the beach while we were there, and it was a lovely time. And I remember lying on the beach, reading this book, and reaching one of the twists, which, if you know this book, you'll know which twists those are. There are two major twists. And I hit one, if not both of them, as I was lying there. And my parents had gone for a walk down the beach, so it was just me and my grandfather left. And I was so blown away by that twist that I wanted to react out loud desperately, but I realized I couldn't because my grandfather was an extremely conservative person. So I didn't dare tell him the nature of this twist because I knew he would not approve of it, and I really didn't want to face that reaction. So it became this wonderful, delicious secret that I had, and it almost made it more fun in a way. And so I will forever remember being there with him as I read this. Next, we go to April of 2018, when I reread The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows. Now, I had read this at some point during college. I read it over one of my summers, and I really enjoyed it. It was lovely. But the Netflix film was coming out or had just come out, so I wanted to reread it. And again, I was flying out to visit my dear friend Amanda. So I took this book with me, and I remember reading it on my flight in. And of course I love it because it celebrates books and how books can draw people together, and because the characters are so wonderful and so vivid. All of those details are absolutely accurate. But what struck me on that reread was the description of towards the beginning. I just tried looking for the passage and I can't find it, but somewhere towards the beginning, Juliet describes going to visit one of her friends who is married and has children, and playing with those children and just having a wonderful time with the boys. But that part was particularly striking to me because I was traveling to see Amanda and to meet her new son, and she now has 2 boys. So I get to be that auntie to them, and that part really struck me and really helped me to identify with Juliet all the more. Then we go to the next month. We go to May of 2018, when I finally read What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullen. And I'm sorry for this being so close, but this is the only way that you can actually read the cover while I'm talking about it. I loved it because, John Mullen is a wonderful scholar, and I love Jane Austen, so why wouldn't I love this? However, it was also a wonderful distraction because in May of 2018, we had a macroburst tornado rip through my area of Connecticut, which had never happened before. And we were without power for about a week. None of the schools in the area could be open. People lost their homes. There was huge damage in the area. It was a really frightening time. Pre-pandemic, it was the most frightened I had ever been. And so we couldn't do much of anything. We couldn't go much of anywhere. So I read through this in about a day and a half, and it was a really lovely escape from that reality. We then go to September of 2019, when I read Verdis Shakespeare by Gary Wills. which is a study of the 3 operas that Giuseppe Verdi wrote that were based on Shakespeare plays. He wrote Otello, which is a version of Othello, Falstaff, which is a version of The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Macbeth, sometimes called Macbetto. And it's particularly fascinating because I love opera and I love Shakespeare, but in addition, that weekend I had gone into New York City to the Metropolitan Opera to see Anna Netrebko sing Lady Macbeth in Macbeth. So I loved being able to read about Verdi's inspiration and how he interpreted Shakespeare in another language and still made it work musically and lyrically, and all the troubles he went through trying to find the right cast initially, what he said that each singer needed to have in order to sing a particular role. And I found that really, really fascinating. And I particularly remember the next morning finishing this book over my breakfast in the library hotel and just having a really relaxed and lovely weekend with it. And my 10th and final travel memory with a book is The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill. And I remember it because this is one of the last books that I traveled with before the pandemic closed everything down. It was February of 2020, and I remember reading this straight through in one day, or very close at least, while I was on the ferry to Long Island to visit my cousin to go bridesmaid dress shopping for her wedding. And I still have the dress as well. We found a lovely dress, although sadly due to the pandemic I did not get to go to her wedding and wear it. But it is still filed away for when we have the party later. But I remember sitting on the ferry and being completely engrossed in this book on the way there and on the way back, and almost wishing that I could be alone in Starbucks as well, just so I could keep reading it. If you're not familiar with The Doll Factory, it is the story of a young woman called Iris who manages to join up with a group that is very much based on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, if they aren't actually called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So it's a wonderful Gothic Victorian tale, because at the same time, she has also been noticed by a man called Silas, who likes to collect things. And the next thing that he decides he wants to collect is Iris. It is utterly gripping, and I will always remember flying through it on that ride back and forth on the boat. So there you have a snapshot into my memories of reading some of the books on my shelves. Let me know down below if you choose to do this tag, or if you just have a particularly vivid memory of reading a book on your shelves. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.